seeing the faces here, I'm thinking, why was it me that was asked to stand up and speak? Because most of you have got a wealth of experience, at least as great as mine, if not greater. So I feel kind of humbled to be with all of you. And like you, Joanna, I can't remember when I last spoke in public. So I said to my wife, well, perhaps I ought to stand up and say, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. And she said, no, don't say that at all. So I'm sure that any one of you could have stood up and said just as eloquently the things I'm going to say, or maybe some other things, because what I'm going to say is very much a sort of personal perspective on innovation during my involvement with it in the rail industry. If you stood up and spoke, you might come up with a different interpretation or a different timeline or whatever. So perhaps at the end, if there's a few minutes when I've finished speaking, you can chip in your bits and say, Francis, you never mentioned so-and-so, or whatever, which is probably because I've forgotten about it as much as anything else. I've always sort of had this view that in the rail industry there are two perspectives on innovation. One is that the rail industry has always been inventive, right from the start, 175 plus years ago, and it's never stopped, and that's why it's still here today. And the alternative view is, well, that's sort of true, but in more recent years, we seem to have gone through the doldrums a bit and failed to take advantage of some of the technological opportunities, at least, that are out there, and as a result, risk sort of being left behind with other transport modes and with wider society. Whether you agree with that, I don't know, but that's been my perspective. And it was partly why I wanted to get involved in innovation. So my innovation journey actually began fairly late in my career when I joined RIA as their technical director that's the Railway Industry Association, in 2008. And it was shortly after that I was contacted by Chris, who I'd never previously known as far as I could remember, who said, would RIA do some investigation into innovation in the rail industry and how the industry could become more innovative. And I think, Chris, you said, oh, can we have the answer in 6 weeks? And after about 5 weeks, I decided that actually I'd got a job for the next few years trying to answer this question. But I think that report, or Chris asking us to do it, was actually a really important spur, because it was considered then by what was then relatively newly formed, the TSLG, Technology Strategy Leadership Group. And it led eventually to the production of the Rail Technical Strategy in 2012. And those of you who remember that far back, Steve Yarney was actually the chair of the TSLG at that stage. And the publication of the RTS was itself accompanied by a couple of memorable videos showing what the railway of the future might look like. A bit speculative, but nevertheless it was forward-looking. And central to the RTS was this idea of the 4 Cs. And traditionally with the 4 Cs, you can always remember 3 of them, and you can't remember the 4th. So it's cost, carbon, capacity, and customer. And at one stage I did think of a 5th C, but I've long forgotten what that was. Brilliant, yes. And we will return to that thought in a few minutes. And I do believe that those 4 Cs are still largely relevant to the industry as it is today. There's a different take around the challenge on capacity, I think, just at the moment, which is how do we fill the capacity we've got? Whereas a few years ago, it was all about how do we make more capacity for the numbers of people and freight that wants to make use of the railways. Now, during that same time frame, RIA was also approached by Chris Carr. I don't know how many of you remember Chris. He went off to...
Joined the railway the same day as me.
Oh, did he?
15th of September 1986.
Brilliant. What's he doing now? Right. So he went to work in Europe, didn't he?
Yeah, we got booted out and sent back here.
Oh. Sorry, well, let's brush over this.
It's Brexit.
Anyway, Chris Carr, alongside Chris Brown, was another sort of vital bit of the rear jigsaw at those days, because I remember after a luncheon one day, he sat myself down with Jeremy Canfield, who was then the Director General of RIA, and he said, I'd like to give RIA some money to do more innovation, because what you're doing I really like, but the industry needs more of it. And he was offering, I think, is about £100,000 for a year. Now, £100,000 goes absolutely nowhere in the rail industry, but for little RIA, being offered £100,000 just like that, this was big stuff as far as we were concerned. So we grabbed his hand and said, thanks very much. And it was as a result of that Jim Lupton there, came on board with RIA, and Neil as well joined or worked for us not long after that, Neil Ridley. And those two together produced the Unlocking Innovation Scheme. That started in 2012, I think. And it is, yeah,
Really?
I think it was, according to my records. And it is still going now, that same endeavour. So it's much needed by the industry. And the other thing we started around the same time, with the support of this funding that we'd got, was the RIA Technology and Innovation Conference. And I always remember Jeremy Canfield reluctantly allowing us to try running this conference for 1 year. And he clearly believed that it was going to run for 1 year and that would be the end of it. Well, it's still going. And David Clark, who wasn't here yet at least, he's now the technical director in RIA, and that conference has gone from strength to strength over the years. There was a load of other innovation and research activities all going on around about the same time, if I just go through them briefly. So RRUKA, Rail Research UK Association, was formed in 2011 out of RRUK. And my perspective on that was that it became instrumental in getting the universities deeply involved in research for the rail sector. There'd been a bit of it going on before, but it was very piecemeal, and this helped it to be more joined up. There were various funding opportunities started to come up, the cooperative ventures with Innovate UK, Richard, with EPSRC and with TSLG. I think Trevor may have been involved in those, I can't remember. And one of those was Accelerating Innovation in Rail competition. I'm not sure if they're still going now, but they did run for a number of years. Don't know if anyone knows.
It's not going now, but it sort of morphed into the first of kind stuff.
Right, okay, thank you. And around 2013, I and a number of other people in the rail industry were at the heart of driving for the formation of the Transport Systems Catapult, which doesn't exist under that name anymore. It's been morphed into something else. I think, is it around urban mobility? Connected Places, thank you. I was nearly right. And I think, I have to say that I don't think Connected Places does a lot to do with the rail sector now, which is unfortunate if it's true, because, as I say, it was the rail sector that drove so hard to convince the powers that be that a Transport Systems Catapult was something worth having. And then in the same year, 2013, there was incorporated into the CP5 settlement, and there is David.
Perfect timing.
Perfect, almost perfect timing. The CP5 settlement included funding, explicit funding for innovation, and I may be wrong, but that was the first time I was ever aware that DFT and the rail industry together acknowledged that there was a need to fund research and innovation in the industry and put their hand in their pocket to help deliver it. So that was a big step forward. 2014, the Rail Supply Group was formed, complementing RDG, and that was also heavily focused, not exclusively, but focused largely on innovation. And in the same year, DfT started to build into the top franchises the requirement to be more innovative. So there's a lot going on around those years which were trying to sort of encourage the industry to step up to the plate. And there was work done as well to promote the development and use of testing and trialling facilities. And Jim, sorry to keep mentioning you, Jim, produced a wonderful book which I still have 2 copies of at home about testing and trialling facilities and how to access them and make use of them and so on. So, and the last thing, sort of recollecting this story, was Routes into Rail was formed, which is, I believe, also still going at the moment under the leadership of NSAR. And Routes into Rail, of course, was not about innovation per se, but it was about getting new blood into the rail industry, and that's absolutely critical if you're going to get somewhere with fresh thinking. Now, in 2015, mid-2015, I left RIA, and David, with a little bit of interim stuff, succeeded me. That was sort of where my personal journey with innovation in the rail sector sort of took a step down, at least. I moved on to become the RSE's chief executive, as you mentioned, Johanna. But there's still stuff going on, and you probably know a lot of it better than I do. So there's a lot of innovation in areas like hydrogen and batteries for powering trains, intelligent traffic management, automated design, remote sensing and monitoring, little forays into artificial intelligence and so on. So there's some good signs of things that are being areas of endeavour. And last October there was a new rail technical strategy published, and you'll forgive me, I'll have to read out. It's focused on 5 key priorities: making rail easy to use, lowering emissions, optimising train operations, improving reliability and ease of maintenance, and using data to drive efficiency and technical progress. And next year, RSSB in the University of Birmingham with UCRIN, which is another thing that's been set up certainly since I ceased my involvement. Together, the RSSB and the University of Birmingham host the World Congress of Rail Research at the International Convention Centre in Birmingham, and it's all about how research can provide new knowledge and novel solutions for reshaping railways after in the wake of the pandemic. So lots of good stuff continues to go on, but there is a perception that we're still not innovative enough. I was talking with Richard earlier on as to whether it's perception or reality, and I don't have a conclusion about that. But I think RIA did a survey of its members last year where about 50% thought that the rail sector was either hardly innovative or not innovative at all. So perception isn't everything, but nevertheless people are still saying, we're not actually doing enough. And in my own field of train control and communications and so on, I remember back in 2001 leading the remit for the development of, a team to develop the remit for the ERTMS programme team, EPT, some of you might remember, which David Reboso was the first leader of. So we're now 20 years on. We haven't got a lot of ERTMS in this country yet, and the technology is regarded by some as being almost dated. It is certainly not innovative anymore. So these enormous time spans for getting things to change on the railways are still problematical. And faced with the changes to come as Great British Railways is formed, the key question is going to be, will the railways in Britain continue to embrace innovation and even raise their game, which I would argue they need to. And only time will tell as to whether GBR manages to encourage that to happen or not. There are reasons to be cheerful, but the slow pace of change in railways, the complex and integrated nature of how railways operate, our collective ability or inability to deliver results that convinces customers and government that it's worth investment, all these things are still, I believe, they're stacked up against us and need to be overcome. For me, a customer-centric approach in addressing issues of environmental impact and cost effectiveness are absolutely at the heart of what the rail industry needs to be doing, addressing in terms of being more innovative. They're going to be the key drivers. And to those, we've now got to add, it comes back to what you said right at the start, Chris, what is hopefully a relatively short-term challenge of attracting customers back onto the railways, because we're still overall at what? Is it 33% of traffic, of customer patronage before the pandemic happened, whereas roads are back beyond where there's more cars on the roads now than there were before the pandemic. So there's a real challenge there. And that's going to require a whole load of innovative thinking. And that includes, in my view, thinking about the pricing of travelling by rail, which interestingly is one of the many things that you mention in your book, Chris, the price of a ticket. So, thank you for your time. That's all I wanted to say. If anyone else has got anything they want to contribute without destroying the evening's timing and agenda, then please go ahead. But thank you very much.